Picture this. There's a force that doesn't kick your door down. It slips through the cracks. It doesn't scream. It whispers. And before you realize it, it has moved your priorities, bent your standards, and quietly rewritten what you think you want. You call it pleasure. You call it just being human. You call it a phase. But the truth is uglier and simpler. Lust is one of the cleanest methods of control ever invented, not because it's strong, but because it's sweet. It offers warmth with a hidden price tag. And the moment you pay, you don't just lose time, you lose your steering wheel. Now listen closely. I'm not here to shame desire. Desire is fuel. Desire builds empires. Desire makes men courageous. But lust is desire without a direction. Lust is fuel spilled across the floor, then lit. Then you stand there confused, watching your own life burn while telling yourself it felt good. That's the trap. Lust isn't only about sex. That's the beginner's definition. Lust is the craving to escape your own internal silence. It's the itch that demands stimulation. It's the hunger for novelty, validation, conquest, consumption, anything that keeps you from feeling the hollow parts of yourself for 5 more minutes. And this is why people only respect you when you deny it. Not because you become cold, not because you become a monk, but because the moment you deny lust, you become harder to buy, you become expensive, you become rare. Think about it. The world doesn't reward the man who's constantly reachable, constantly tempted, constantly pulled around by the next shiny thing. That man is predictable. And predictable men are easy to manage, easy to flatter, easy to bait, easy to sell. But the man who can feel desire and still hold his frame becomes something else. He becomes sovereign. Sovereignty is the core idea here. Real sovereignty isn't political. It's psychological. It's the ability to sit inside your own mind and not be dragged by the leash of your impulses. Because the second your impulse becomes law, you don't have a life. You have a routine, a loop, a script. And here's the essence. Lust is not about wanting something. It's about not wanting to be here. That's why it hijacks your focus. That's why it warps your goals. That's why it drains your drive and then laughs while you call it relaxing. Lust doesn't just want your body. It wants your attention. And attention is the most valuable currency you have. In a world built on distraction, attention is a throne. So ask yourself, no performance, no excuses. How many choices have you made because you were clear? And how many because you were craving? How many promises did you break? Not because you're evil, but because you were hungry. How many hours did you sacrifice at the altar of just one more? This is where people get uncomfortable, because lust is rarely obvious in the moment. It doesn't announce itself as a villain. It disguises itself as love, as stress relief, as I deserve this, as it's not a big deal. But lust always has the same signature. It makes you smaller after you obey it. The high is quick, the emptiness is long, and the longer you repeat the loop, the more your mind starts to associate peace with stimulation. That's when you stop living. You start chasing. Freud famously pointed to hidden sexual forces underneath human behavior. And whether you agree with every detail or not, the pattern is recognizable. When an urge stays unconscious, it doesn't disappear. It drives. It becomes a silent commander. You call it personality. You call it fate. You call it, this is just how I am. But Jung offered something sharper. Bring the impulse into awareness. Look at it without flinching, not to suppress it, because suppression turns energy into poison, but to integrate it, to turn the shadow into usable strength. That's the deeper move. You don't kill desire, you refine it. Because the real war is not against pleasure, the war is against unconsciousness. Every tradition that understood power understood this. The Stoics said you don't control events, you control your mind. And the mind that cannot control itself becomes property, owned by moods, owned by urges, owned by whatever is loudest inside the chest. 6. How Machiavelli would outsmart. So what do? You start by seeing lust for what it truly is, a misdirected signal. It's the body saying, I want relief. It's the heart saying, I want connection. It's the ego saying, I want to feel important. It's the nervous system saying, I can't sit with this discomfort. Lust rises most violently from lack, from loneliness, from inadequacy, from boredom, from the quiet terror of being alone with your own thoughts. And modern life knows this. It feeds it. The algorithm is not your friend. It's a fisherman. Your attention is the ocean. And lust is the bait that never runs out. Swipe, scroll, click, chase, repeat. The screen offers you 1,000 doors, but behind each one is the same room. Not yet. Not yet satisfied. Not yet fulfilled. Not yet whole. That's why lust is incarceration disguised as freedom. Now, here's the metaphor that should stay with you. Lust is a golden chain. It doesn't look like a prison. It looks like jewelry. It sparkles. It feels exciting. And while you're busy admiring it, you don't notice the chain is attached to your throat. Deny lust, and you don't become numb. You become untouchable. Because when pleasure is no longer your master, no one can steer you with temptation. When stimulation is no longer your religion, no one can sell you your identity. When you can sit in the fire of desire without moving, your mind stops being a marketplace. It becomes a fortress. And once your mind becomes a fortress, the world starts treating you like a king. Here's the moment where most people miss the point. They think denying lust is about restriction, about saying no, about tightening the jaw and white-knuckling their way through temptation like a punishment. That misunderstanding alone keeps them trapped. Because resistance without understanding doesn't create power. It creates pressure. And pressure always looks for a leak. The real move isn't denial. It's dominance. Dominance begins with observation. The instant an urge rises, most people merge with it. They don't see it, they become it. The craving says move, and they move. The impulse says escape, and they run. There's no distance, no space, no pause. And without a pause, there is no choice. That's the essence. Freedom is the space between impulse and action. When you create that space, something strange happens. The urge loses its authority, not because it vanishes, but because it's finally seen. And what is seen clearly stops pretending to be destiny. This is why ancient disciplines never told you to crush desire. They taught you to watch it, like a fire. Too close and it burns you. Too far and it gives no warmth. Mastery is learning where to stand. Ask yourself this. When lust appears, where does it actually live in your body? Is it tension in the chest, restlessness in the hands, heat in the gut, a buzzing behind the eyes? Most people can't answer because they've never looked. They jump straight to relief. But the man who is respected doesn't rush for relief. He studies the signal. And what you'll find, this is the uncomfortable truth, is that lust is rarely about what it claims to want. It promises pleasure, but it's bargaining for something else. Validation, power, escape, forgetting, feeling chosen, feeling alive. Lust is the salesman. Pain is the client. Once you see that, the spell weakens. Because now the question changes. It's no longer, how do I stop this urge? It becomes, what is this urge trying to protect me from feeling? That single shift turns lust from a tyrant into a messenger. And messengers don't need obedience. They need interpretation. This is where respect enters the picture. People respect those who are not ruled by their hunger. Not because hunger is immoral, but because hunger makes you predictable. A man who must have becomes a man who can be led. A man who can wait becomes a man others wait for. Think about power dynamics for a moment. In any room business, romance, leadership, the person least desperate controls the tempo. They don't chase energy. Energy adjusts to them. Why? Because desperation leaks. It speaks in micro behaviors, in tone, in posture, in timing. Lust makes you loud without speaking, and people read it. When you deny lust, not suppress, but outgrow it, you stop signaling need. Your presence slows, your attention sharpens, you listen instead of leaning. You choose instead of reacting. That shift alone changes how others treat you. They feel it before they understand it. Here's the metaphor. Lust is static on the signal. It fills your inner world with noise, opinions, fantasies, urgency. And while that noise is playing, you miss what actually matters. The subtle cues, the long-term consequences, the quiet opportunities that only appear when the mind is still. When you reduce the noise, the signal returns. Clarity is not loud. It doesn't beg. It doesn't rush. It waits. And clarity is magnetic. This is why denying lust often makes people uncomfortable around you, not because you're judgmental, but because you're not vibrating at the same frequency. You're not reacting. You're not feeding the collective itch. And that forces others to feel their own impulses more clearly. Silence does that. Silence exposes, so they label you cold, intense, different. What they're really sensing is self-command. And self-command is rare enough to feel threatening. Now let's go deeper. Lust doesn't just steal your focus, it fractures your identity. Each indulgence pulls you slightly away from your long-term self. The version of you who plans, builds, endures. Over time, that fracture becomes a gap. You start to feel inconsistent, unreliable to yourself. Strong in vision, weak in execution. That's when confidence erodes. Not because you're incapable, but because you don't trust your own word. Every time you say, "I'll start tomorrow," and obey the urge today, something inside you records that. It remembers, and eventually, it stops believing you. That's the hidden cost of lust. Internal disrespect. And if you don't respect yourself, the world won't compensate for it. The opposite is also true. Every time you feel the urge and choose alignment, instead restraint, redirection, presence, you deposit trust back into your own system. You become someone you can rely on. That reliability creates gravity. Gravity creates respect. Here's the final image to carry forward. Lust is a river. Most people are thrown into it and carried wherever the current wants. They call that going with the flow. But the man who learns to swim doesn't fight the river. He uses it. He lets the current power his movement without deciding his destination. That's mastery. You don't dam the river. You don't drown in it. You learn how to move through it with intention. And once you do, something irreversible happens. You stop needing approval. You stop chasing sensation. You stop leaking energy into places that give nothing back. You start arriving instead of pursuing, and when you arrive calm, present, undistracted, the world adjusts. Because nothing commands respect more than a man who cannot be pulled. Nothing. If you're ready, the next step goes deeper. Because awareness is only the beginning. What comes next is transmutation, turning the same force that once drained you into something that builds you. Once awareness is established, a new question emerges. And this is where power either crystallizes or collapses. What do you do with the energy? Because make no mistake, lust is energy. Raw, volatile, undirected energy. If you simply block it, it turns inward and corrodes you. If you indulge it, it spills outward and drains you. But if you refine it, if you give it form and purpose, it becomes one of the most potent fuels a human being can access. This is where most people fail not morally, but strategically. They notice the urge, they pause, and then they do nothing meaningful with what they've just contained. The energy has nowhere to go, so it circles back, stronger, louder, more demanding. That's why restraint without redirection feels unbearable. You're holding a storm in your hands with no channel to release it. Mastery is not suppression, it's transmutation. Ancient traditions understood this long before neuroscience could name it. They didn't fear desire, they respected its force. They treated it like fire. Fire warms homes, forges steel, and cooks food. But without a hearth, it burns everything down. Your discipline is the hearth. Here's the essence. Whatever you don't consciously aim, your impulses will aim for you. That's why people stuck in lust often feel directionless. They confuse stimulation with movement. But movement without direction is just noise. Real power requires a vector, a target, a higher aim strong enough to pull energy upward instead of letting it leak sideways. Ask yourself honestly, what is worthy of your desire? Not what excites you for 10 minutes, but what could hold your attention for 10 years. What demands patience? What rewards depth? What grows stronger the more you invest in it? Craft, strength, knowledge, leadership, creation, service, legacy. Lust collapses time. Purpose expands it. When you have no compelling future pulling you forward, the present moment gets hijacked by cravings. But when your future has weight, when it matters, impulses lose their urgency. Not because you're stronger, but because you're anchored. This is why disciplined people often appear calm. Their energy isn't scattered. It's committed. Now let's ground this. Psychologically, modern neuroscience shows that repeated indulgence trains the brain into dopamine loops, short spikes followed by deeper baselines. Pleasure becomes cheaper. Satisfaction becomes harder. You need more stimulation to feel less. That's not freedom, that's dependency with better marketing. But here's the key insight. Dopamine doesn't only spike from pleasure, it spikes from progress, from effort, from challenge, from meaningfully difficult work. When you redirect lust-driven energy into disciplined action, the brain rewires. The reward system starts associating fulfillment with mastery instead of release. Over time, cravings weaken. Not because you're denying yourself, but because your system has learned a superior payoff. This is why men who train hard, build intensely, and think deeply often experience fewer intrusive urges. Their energy is occupied. Not distracted, occupied. Here's the metaphor. Lust is a wild horse. If you leave it unattended, it will run you into exhaustion. If you lock it in a cage, It will go mad. But if you train it slowly, patiently, it becomes a force that carries you farther than your legs ever could. Training begins with rituals, not grand gestures. Small, repeatable acts that bind energy to intention. When desire surges, don't ask how to escape it. Ask how to use it. Physical exertion, focused work, creative output, strategic thinking, anything that demands presence and produces something real. Action grounds energy, and grounding energy dissolves compulsions. This is where respect compounds. Others may not know what you're doing internally, but they feel the result. You become steady, decisive, less reactive. Your words carry more weight because they're not inflated by need. You stop negotiating with yourself and people sense that. They sense alignment. Alignment is terrifying to those who lack it. Now understand this. Lust also distorts how you relate to people. It turns humans into symbols, objects of relief, validation, or fantasy. And when you see people as symbols, you can't truly connect with them. Connection requires presence. Lust erodes presence. When desire is refined, relationships change. You stop grasping. You start seeing. You listen without agenda. You interact without covert hunger. And paradoxically, this restraint makes you more attractive, not because you want less, but because you're not trying to take. People feel safe around self-command. They feel respected. This is why denying lust doesn't make you invisible. It makes you clear. Clarity is intimidating in a world addicted to stimulation. Now here's the hard truth most won't tell you. Society profits from your lack of mastery. Entire industries are built on your distraction, your exhaustion, your craving. If you cannot obey yourself, something else will command you: an algorithm, a market, a narrative that benefits from your attention being fragmented. Self-mastery makes you ungovernable. That's why it's discouraged, mocked, pathologized, reduced to moral language instead of strategic language. But strip away the moral fog, and the equation is simple. The man who controls his impulses controls his life, and the man who controls his life earns respect, whether he asks for it or not. Here's the image to seal this part. Lust is a furnace. Left unattended, it consumes the house. Properly engineered, it powers the city. The difference is structure. The difference is intention. And once you build that structure, once you learn to aim this energy instead of leaking it, you cross a quiet threshold. You're no longer fighting yourself. You're working with yourself. That's when power stops feeling forced. And in the next stage, something even deeper happens. Lust no longer feels like an enemy or a temptation, but like a teacher. A signal guiding you toward integration, presence, and a level of inner authority that very few ever reach. At a certain point, something subtle shifts. The battle quiets. The tension softens. And you realize you're no longer fighting lust, you're listening to it. This is where most frameworks end, but where real mastery begins. Because once energy is redirected, the deeper work emerges, understanding what desire is actually pointing toward. Lust, when stripped of its urgency, reveals itself as a misinterpreted signal. It was never asking for indulgence. It was asking for integration. Here's the core idea. Desire is not your enemy. Fragmentation is. Lust becomes destructive only when parts of you are split off, ignored, or shamed. The more you exile pieces of yourself, the louder they scream. The more you pretend not to feel, the more violently sensation demands attention. But when you bring those parts into awareness without judgment, Without panic, they lose their need to hijack your behavior. This is why awareness transforms everything. When an urge arises and you meet it with presence instead of reaction, something remarkable happens. The craving slows. It becomes transparent. You begin to see its anatomy, the image it uses, the story it tells, the promise it makes. And behind all of it, the same quiet hunger appears again and again. Connection, meaning, aliveness. Lust is the counterfeit. Presence is the real currency. This is why so many traditions converge on the same conclusion from different directions. Buddhism calls craving the root of suffering. Christian mystics spoke of lust as a veil over the soul's vision. Stoics warned that being ruled by impulse is a form of slavery. They weren't condemning pleasure. They were diagnosing distraction. Distraction from the present moment. Distraction from truth. Distraction from self-command. The essence is simple but uncomfortable. Lust pulls you into, not now. Presence anchors you in here, and power only exists here. Think about it, every meaningful action requires presence. Leadership, creation, intimacy, insight. You cannot access depth while constantly leaning forward into the next hit of stimulation. A fragmented mind cannot build anything lasting. It can only consume. This is why denial of lust often restores respect so quickly. You stop leaking attention into imaginary futures and unreal scenarios. You become grounded. People feel that grounding. It's stabilizing. In a chaotic world, stability reads as strength. Here's the metaphor. Lust is a mirage in the desert. From a distance, it looks like water. It promises relief. But the closer you chase it, the further it pulls you from what actually sustains you. Presence, on the other hand, is the well beneath your feet, quiet, unglamorous, but inexhaustible. Once you taste that, the mirage loses its power. Now, something else begins to change. How you experience temptation. Instead of seeing it as an enemy to resist or a prize to seize, you experience it as heat. And heat can destroy or it can forge. This is where discipline matures into refinement. You stop asking, "How do I avoid temptation?" and start asking, "How do I stand in it without losing myself?" Because the world will not stop tempting you. If anything, it will increase the pressure. The question is not whether fire exists, but whether you have been tempered. Tempering is exposure without collapse. It's the ability to feel desire fully without being possessed by it. To sense attraction without chasing. To acknowledge craving without obeying. This is not numbness. This is sensitivity with control. And sensitivity with control is the mark of a dangerous man. Not dangerous in chaos, but dangerous in precision. Now consider how this changes intimacy. Lust takes, presence gives. Lust consumes the image of a person. Presence encounters the reality of them. When you are no longer driven by internal hunger, you stop relating from lack. You meet others from surplus. That shift rewires relationships. You're no longer trying to fill a void, you're sharing a fullness. Conversations deepen, eye contact holds, silence becomes comfortable. People feel seen rather than used, even unconsciously. This is why true intimacy is impossible without self-mastery, because you cannot meet another fully while fleeing yourself. Here's the psychological truth few articulate. Unchecked lust fragments. Attention. Fragmented attention fragments identity. Fragmented identity breeds anxiety, and anxiety seeks relief. The loop closes. Presence breaks the loop. Presence unifies attention. Unified attention stabilizes identity. Stable identity dissolves anxiety. And without anxiety, lust loses urgency. This is not moral theory. It's architecture of the mind. Now notice what happens as this integration deepens. Your energy changes quality. It becomes quieter but denser, less flashy, more gravitational. You don't announce yourself, but you're felt. You don't chase respect, but it appears. Because respect is not demanded. It's induced. People respect those who are not internally divided, those whose actions align with their values, those who don't need to perform desire to feel alive. Here's the image to carry. Lust is raw ore. In its unrefined state, it's heavy, unstable, and difficult to use. But once smelted, once impurities are burned away, it becomes steel. And steel doesn't shout. It holds. It supports. It cuts cleanly when needed. This is the stage where lust no longer rules you, but it also no longer haunts you. It has been transformed into vitality, focus, creative force, into presence. And presence does something nothing else can do. It awakens. In the final movement, this awakening completes its arc. Desire stops pulling you outward and begins drawing you inward, toward meaning, coherence, and a kind of freedom that doesn't depend on circumstance. That's where we're going next. At the end of this path, one truth stands naked and undeniable. Mastery was never about killing desire. It was about removing it from the throne. When lust no longer rules you, it doesn't vanish. It matures. The chaos quiets. The hunger refines. What once dragged your attention outward now gathers it inward. You are no longer scattered. You are centered. This is the awakening. You realize the great deception lust sold you, that fulfillment exists somewhere ahead. One more experience, one more escape, one more conquest. But fulfillment was never absent. It was buried beneath noise, urgency, and distraction. And now, the noise has gone silent. Presence returns, and presence changes everything. You begin to live inside your moments instead of fleeing them. You work without fragmentation. You rest without numbness. You speak with intention. You listen without hunger. Life slows, not because it has less to offer, but because you are finally here to receive it. Here is the core truth. Presence is a power nothing can steal. No temptation can bribe it. No algorithm can fracture it. No craving can command it. This is why those who master themselves become quietly formidable. They don't need stimulation to feel alive. They don't chase validation to feel whole. Their nervous system is no longer at war with itself. They are grounded. From that ground, discipline stops feeling like denial. It becomes alignment. You no longer force yourself to resist what drains you. You simply lose interest in it. Your desire evolves. You begin wanting clarity more than pleasure, depth more than novelty, integrity more than relief. This is the final alchemy. When discipline becomes desire, people feel this shift before they understand it. Your presence grows heavier. Your silence carries weight. You don't rush. You don't grasp. You don't leak urgency. You move like someone who is not running from himself. Here is the final metaphor. Lust is a storm that once dictated your direction. Presence is the sky. The storm may still pass, but the sky remains untouched. That is sovereignty, and sovereignty commands respect without asking. This is not an ending. It is a posture, a way of standing inside yourself. Each moment offers the same choice: react or respond, chase or choose, escape or remain. Every time you choose presence, you reinforce your freedom. Walk forward with this knowing. Nothing outside you holds power over you anymore, unless you hand it the crown.